Hello crafty friends, I'm Lien from Studio Kato and I'm so happy to be back with another video for Spellbinders. This is actually a pretty old one and I just got around to editing it. It's for the Modern Ovals collection from June. Yes, it is that old. And I made a couple of cards. I actually made more than just these, but these feature some of the same products and a similar layout, so I thought they would fit well together in a video. Like I said, I'm using the Essential Modern Ovals die set from Spellbinders, and I am diving right in because these are die cut cards and I feel like I always start in the middle of the process for those because I do all my die cutting off camera. Now for this card I wanted to add some splatter to the background and not on the flowers that I'll add. So I am doing this way before I add anything else. This is the Antique Bronze Distress Spray Stain and it's gorgeous to splatter on dark cardstock. This is the Midnight cardstock from Concord 9th and it is such stunning blue cardstock. Actually, all of the cardstock and ink colors that I'll be using today are from Concord 9th, and they all feature a similar color palette. Sometimes I left some of the colors out, but I didn't really add any more colors than these. Now, I used the Modern Ovals die set to die cut a frame, and I just do that by taping two dies together. So I use some temporary adhesive, temporary tape, and I just tape two dies together and then put them on the cardstock to cut out. And I cut out a bunch of frames of the same size this way while these dies were still taped together. I did also add a little bit of foam tape behind this. So this is some brushed rose cardstock from Altenew, which is such a stunning metallic cardstock. And then there's a layer of white cardstock underneath the frame and then a layer of foam tape as well. I will show you a trick for the foam tape to layer this behind such a thin frame later. Now the flowers I'm using today are from the Club Blooms die set and this should still be available. As of recording this voiceover, this is still available, but it will run out quickly. This was a die kit of the month or a large die of the month, I think from January, and when there are die sets left over, they are still available until they sell out and then they never come back in stock. So if you want this die set and you didn't subscribe to the Spellbinders Club kits, you should run and get it now. I think these flowers are absolutely stunning. There are some really large flowers in there, I love that. I think it's a great focal point on a card. For this one, I'm obviously just combining a bunch of flowers together, but in a later card you'll see I only use one large flower and I love that look as well, and that's where these really large blooms definitely come in handy. Now I'm playing a lot with dimension for this card, so some flowers and leaves and sprigs I'm just tucking underneath and not propping up on anything, and others are propped up on 3 layers of foam tape. So I went a little bit crazy with the dimensional tape here, but I think it pays off in the end. It's mostly just puzzling to fit the dimensional adhesive around the frame, so behind the blooms but around the frame so it doesn't overlap with the dimensional frame as well. I also really love the greenery in the Club Blooms die set. Some of the smaller leaves are from other die sets, but most of them are from the Club Blooms. Now, when something isn't adhered quite right, I just try to carefully peel it up. My foam tape is a little bit forgiving, more forgiving than liquid glue once it's dry anyway, so I managed to pull it up when I really need to. This U is from the Wonderful Script Sentiments die set. There is a coordinating hot foil plate as well, which is stunning. This is not it, by the way, but it has a completely different name. Now this one is the Yana's Tiny Sentiments. There were a couple of hot foil plates there that don't belong in this Tiny Sentiment set, but this just is perfect for sentiment strips. I'm using the blush glimmer foil for this, and I'm foiling this with the Glimmer system from Spellbinders. I'm doing this on the same Midnight cardstock from Concord and 9th. The Concord and 9th cardstocks are fairly smooth, so perfect for hot foiling. I highly recommend the black, especially for hot foiling, and the white for hot foiling as well. Spellbinders has specialty glimmer cardstock, but it has a sort of glossy finish to it, which is really nice. It's just not what I'm looking for all the time. So I highly recommend this white cardstock from Concord and 9th and the black cardstock if you want some basics. The colored ones, obviously, are also good. Now, what I was saying about the Sentiment hot foil plate, it has a completely different name, the Scripty Sentiments. It has something about Hello Friend, but I will list it along with all the other products that I used in today's video in the description below so you can find it. For my second card, I'm doing something completely different, but I'm sticking with a color scheme. Now, I want my focal point to be this Glimmer Bouquet from Spellbinders. It has a coordinating die that comes in the Glimmer set. So the die set or the Glimmer hot foil set you get is this glimmer plate along with the coordinating die. I love when the coordinating dies are included. Again, I'm using that blush glimmer foil because it fits perfectly with my color scheme. Although the color scheme is a little bit out of my comfort zone. When I create a bunch of cards for a new release, I try these days to stick with one color scheme just because it makes things easier for me. I don't adhere to it as strictly usually as I did in this video. That's why it stands out probably. But yeah, this just makes things easier because you only have to worry about your color scheme once instead of trying to figure out a different color combination for each of your cards. So if you're making a ton of cards, picking out a color scheme beforehand is definitely helpful. I always love that peel up of the foil and revealing that foiled image. Now, I did this on watercolor cardstock, and that's another good cardstock to foil on. I don't know why, because it makes no sense in my head, but watercolor cardstock foils beautifully every time for me. Now, usually you want a very smooth cardstock to foil on. That's why I don't think it makes sense that watercolor cardstock foils so beautifully, but it just does, even though it's not that smooth. I am actually using re-inkers to paint today. These are, again, from Concord and 9th, and I have prepared my colors in advance, so I have added a few drops of the re-inker. Really, you only need one, but sometimes I've added two, just to make sure I had plenty of one color. And then I just add a couple of drops of water as well. And you can use these just as regular watercolors, but you do need to keep in mind that sometimes they behave a little bit differently than watercolor on the paper. So sometimes re-inkers on certain cardstocks don't blend out as easily as regular watercolor would. I just recommend you test it out and experiment with the inks you have, because it's different for every type of ink you use. I think distress inks are a little bit easier to paint with, maybe. I don't have distress inks, so this is just what I've gathered from watching YouTube videos. But yeah, so you can paint with any re-inker, any dye re-inker you have. You can also paint with oxide re-inkers, by the way. And those are really fun because you can paint with them on darker cardstock. So if you have re-inkers in your stash, you're probably never going to use them up. And if you do, you really love that color. So just paint with them. It's a great use for them, and it stretches your supplies a little bit. Once this is all colored in, I can die cut this out. Once it's dry, I can die cut this out with a coordinating die. But I am also going to use these re-inkers to paint my background. This is quite a colorful and busy card because there's so much color in the card, but I think it turned out really, really fun. Honestly, I filmed this video a while ago, months ago, and I forgot how much shading I did. But here finally is the background. This is something I used to do a lot when I didn't have a ton of background products, because I feel like background products are something you build up in your stash over time, the longer you craft. But when you first start out, you probably don't have as many background stamps and stencils and whatever you want. And I feel like this technique is such a fun one. You obviously don't have to use this many colors for your backgrounds. You can do it a little bit more subtle, but just painting on some hand-drawn stripes on your watercolor cardstock is going to give you a really fun look. And stripes go for everything. I love a stripy background. I just paint on the ink and it just ends up being darker on one side than the other because I always start from the same side. You can fix this by just adding more ink towards the end. I thought the look would be fun to be a little bit uneven colored. Again, I am going to cut a frame with those essential modern ovals, and you can see I'm stacking up 2 layers of white cardstock and 1 layer of glitter cardstock. This is the tonic, what's it called? I think Welsh gold. So it has a rosy shine to it. It's not completely rose gold, but it's definitely redder than your usual gold. I also cut a piece of vellum with the largest oval I used for the frame, and I'm just adhering my frame on top of that. This is going to make sure that my floral bouquet or my glimmer bouquet actually stands out on that very busy background. Now here you can see how I cut those tiny strips of foam tape that I used behind the frames. I put a little bit of foam tape on a piece of baking paper. Parchment paper will work too. Anything that has that sort of release paper feel to it. So sticker paper, if you have that, will work beautifully. And this just makes sure that your scissors don't get stuck to your foam tape at all, because this way you have a release paper on both sides. And if you take the release paper off of both sides, it's also really easy to curve the foam tape. So even though these ovals are obviously quite round, you can definitely curve the foam tape to follow, well, the curve of the oval. I'm going to adhere my watercolor stripy background onto a top folding A2 card. I'm just using liquid glue for that. I love the Barely Art Precision Craft glue. I used to say I didn't love it that much, and I am finally going to apologize for that. I got a bottle that was just a little bit weird. If you receive your Barely Art Precision Craft glue in the mail, shake it up before you use it. And that was my problem, because all the very liquid glue was at the top and it just wasn't strong enough to adhere embellishments for me, which obviously I didn't like. So I kept saying it in every video. If you receive your glue, shake it up and you shouldn't have that problem. So yeah, shake it up before you refill the bottle every time. But other than that, I've always really liked this glue. It's very thin. It's perfect to adhere paper to paper. And I am starting to use my second bottle to adhere embellishments with as well. Now my final card, not the first one, is the third one by now. I am going to create a little bit less of a busy card, but I am going to use some sprays here. This is the Fossilized Ember Distress Spray Stain. I love the Distress Spray Stains. You also have an oxide variant of these. I just don't love the finish of oxide inks. So I really like this watercolor look you get just by spraying on some ink. I think it's a really quick and fun background. I often take the spray itself out of the bottle and just flick with the little, I don't know what it's called, with the little plastic bit to get more, to get bigger splatters. And I always heat set it immediately, because if you have a couple of puddles on there, it dries in really interesting ways. You don't have to have oxides to create lots of fun textures with your sprays. I also use some clean water and splatter some of that on to take some of the color away again at the end. So that creates fun texture too. Again, I am working on watercolor cardstock. These inks are obviously very wet, so if you use these on regular cardstock, you might not like the way your cardstock buckles. Watercolor cardstock is the way to go. And once this is dry, or I have blotted up all of the wet pieces, I am going to work on my background, and it's a really easy one. I'm using the Floral Vines 3D embossing folder from Spellbinders and a piece of white cardstock. I am going to dampen that a little bit with a baby wipe. And once that's done, you can put it in your 3D embossing folder and roll that through your die cutting machine following the instructions or recommendations on your particular die cutting machine. I like to adhere these usually with double-sided tape. Sometimes I use liquid glue, and I always regret it in the end because I feel like I just feel like double-sided adhesive works a little bit better for 3D embossing folders. Now, I forgot to mention why you dampen the cardstock before you put it in your embossing folder. It's just to loosen the fibers of the cardstock, and that way it's not going to get those little tears in it when you put it through your embossing folder, because it adds so much dimension. Sometimes it tears the cardstock. When you dampen your cardstock, that shouldn't happen. Now I've matted that sprayed orange oval on top of a slightly larger full orange oval to create a fun frame, and this is a little bit easier a frame to create than actually die cutting a little tiny frame like I did for the other two cards. Once again, I am using the Club Blooms die set from Spellbinders. This is just one large flower that I'm creating here, and I love that center cut from the Welsh Gold glitter cardstock. It just gives a little bit of shine to this card. There's also a little stem for this flower, so I'm adhering that into place as well. But obviously that stem is quite thin. I wish I had backed it with a layer of white cardstock, but oh well, I didn't. I'm back with the wonderful Script Sentiments die set, and I die cut the Hello twice from white cardstock and once from that same Welsh Gold cardstock. And I'm stacking those together, and once those are stacked, I can assemble my card. So I put some foam tape behind the ovals, not really for dimension, because I don't think this card needed that dimension in that spot, but it's just easier to use foam tape on top of a 3D embossed background, because the foam tape is sort of going to make up for the difference in dimension. And then I'm adhering my flower on top as well with some foam tape just behind the flower part, and the stem I'm just kind of letting it float. And the hello is adhered on top of the stem with some liquid glue. I'm finishing up my embellishments here, and then that card is done as well. 3 fun floral cards today, just to take a little bit of a break from the Halloween videos, although I do have tons more coming up. I have only done Halloween crafting this past 2 weeks now, I think, and I have no regrets. I am having so much fun with the Halloween cards, but yeah, I thought maybe YouTube deserved a little break from my obsession with Halloween, so I thought I'd edit this very old video now. I also really like the cards that I made, and I never got around to sharing them on YouTube, and I thought that was a shame. I haven't even shared this dark one on Instagram, and it's probably one of my favorite cards I've made this year because of the contrast in it with the dark cardstock and the really light leaves. I loved it. I hope you like these cards. I hope you liked the video. If you did, make sure to leave a thumbs up on this video. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'm always happy to hear them. And if you have any questions, leave those in the comments below as well. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And I'll also be back very soon with another video, so stay tuned for that. Definitely subscribe if you're interested in more of my videos so you don't miss a thing. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!